Today, I once again find myself on the Jubilee line at North Greenwich. Now, perhaps the most important thing to note about North Greenwich is that it's not actually in Greenwich. Do not make that mistake. You cannot get to Greenwich on the tube. In fact, North Greenwich is more like Charlton, although it is on the Greenwich Peninsula. Hold on, I'm confusing even myself at this point. How did this mess arise? Well, would you believe me if I said it was all to do with money? I know, hard to believe, but bear with me. North Greenwich is on the Jubilee line extension. The idea behind this line was to facilitate economic growth in south, east and southeast London. The main priority was Canary Wharf, which in the 1990s was being transformed from derelict dockland to a new commercial district, but that was far from the only area that required a bit of the old economic stimulation. From the 1960s onwards, the docks on both sides of the river had been in decline and redevelopment had been on the cards since before the Jubilee line had even been built. One of the areas identified as ripe for redevelopment was the Greenwich Peninsula, a heavily industrialised part of southeast London. The big stumbling block was a lack of public transport. The only railway actually running onto the peninsula, apart from a number of industrial lines, was the Angerstein Railway, which connected with the North Kent Main Line into London Bridge. Not really suitable for the levels of passengers hoped for. In the 1970s, a line was proposed called the Fleet Line, which would eventually morph into the Jubilee Line. One of the many versions of the Fleet Line would have called at North Greenwich, finally giving it the desperately needed mass transit link. After many delays and rethinks, official permission was granted to extend the Jubilee Line in 1992. North Greenwich was, like all the stations on the Jubilee Line extension, designed on a grand scale. It was intended to be a transport hub with bus links and a huge car park. It would have 3 platforms. It would even have the provision to build a branch line to Thamesmead in the future. It was a far larger and more elaborate station than the location needed, but that was the whole point. It wasn't designed for the current needs of the peninsula, but for the future. The name North Greenwich was more attractive than Charlton. Sorry to any residents of Charlton watching this, but Greenwich is a royal borough with a palace and a sailing ship and everything, whereas Charlton is mostly famous for a football team. It's the old estate agent's trick of talking the place up. The station is on the edge of the borough of Greenwich, so technically it's in Greenwich in the same sense that Southwark Station is technically in Southwark, i.e. not really. And now we have to talk about the white elephant in the room. The O2, or as it used to be called back in the day, the Millennium Dome. It all started with a grand scheme to celebrate the year 2000 with an exhibition of the very best of British. The plan was devised under John Major's Conservative government, then Tony Blair's Labour government took the ball and ran with it. This was going to be huge, bigger than the Festival of Britain, bigger than the Great Exhibition. It was going to have a special episode of Blackadder and everything. And the location of this greatest of great exhibitions was to be Birmingham. And why not? Birmingham is far more central to Britain, and this was to be a show for the benefit of the entire nation. Hang on a minute, lads, said the government. I've got a better idea. How about the Greenwich Peninsula? It was a huge empty space. It was going to get a spiffy new tube station, and it could act as a magnet for investment in the area. Richard Rogers designed a gigantic marquee structure that would be known as the Millennium Dome. The proposal wasn't without its problems, not least of which was the ground itself. The dome was to be built on land vacated by the South Metropolitan Gas Company's East Greenwich Works, which had spent the last century or so merrily filling the soil with naphthalene, sulphur, ammonia, tar, and everything a growing boy really doesn't need. A vast reclamation project was undertaken. Meanwhile, the private investment that the government were hoping for didn't materialise, so the project was controversially funded with public money. While all this was going on, the Jubilee line was running into problems of its own. There were delays in construction. Not that anyone was particularly worried. The line was to be completed in March 1998. They had over a year and a half's leeway. But problems mounted up. First, the tunnels came under scrutiny. They were built using a technique known as the New Austrian Tunnelling Method, which came into question when a tunnel in Heathrow collapsed in 1994. Construction was delayed until everyone was satisfied it was safe. Then there was a problem with the signalling system in that it hadn't been invented yet. Or at least, there was no way the new signalling system was going to be ready by opening. Then there were problems in Westminster, both literally and figuratively. Members of Parliament objected to the Jubilee station being built under Parliament Square. You know how those guys get about construction work in Westminster. Consequently, the whole thing had to be rethought. More delays. The opening date was revised to September 1998. Then March 1999. It was starting to look like the Millennium Dome wouldn't get its tube station. In desperation, London Transport brought in Bechtel, an American construction company, to take charge. Bechtel decided to work on opening the line in phases, starting with the Stratford to North Greenwich section. The line was finally completed with the opening of Westminster Station on the 22nd of December 1999, just in time for the Millennium celebration. National embarrassment had been avoided by mere days. Then it turned out that the dome was really underwhelming, attendance was way below expectations, and the Blackadder episode wasn't very funny. But at least they had their station. Hello all, I hope you enjoyed this millennial tale from the tube. If you did, please do hit the like button and consider subscribing for more stories of underground stations and national shame. As ever, thanks to my donors on Ko-fi and Patreon for being the reclamation project to my toxic sludge. Links to those below. The Ko-fi and the Patreon, not the toxic sludge. And I'll see you all again very soon for another tale from the tube.